Innate helps companies avoid project surprises, make better informed decisions, share knowledge, and deliver better outcomes. Innate, transforming the way the world builds.
Welcome to 2023. In this episode, we talk to Susanne Madsen about leadership, emotional intelligence, and stress management. Good way to start the year. Susanne Madsen is an internationally recognized leadership coach and mentor for project and change managers. She has partnered and founded the Project Leadership Institute, which runs leadership programs to help project managers become better leaders in the workplace.
During her career, Susanne has worked with many high-profile companies such as JP Morgan, Citigroup, Philips, BAM, and NXP, to name just a few. She's a fully qualified corporate and executive coach, an NLP practitioner, DISC accredited, and a regular contributor to the Association for Project Management. In addition, Susanne is a popular keynote speaker on the topic of leadership, emotional intelligence, and stress management. Now, Val, you listening to that bio over there, you gave her one or two pointed questions, and she's got quite a big varied background on a lot of this. What were some of the key moments for you?
Oh, it was great to talk about mindfulness and mindfulness. I think we talked about how you can actually apply that in a real sense, not just in a fluffy sense. I loved the analogy or the concept of leading from the front and leading from behind. They were my two kind of takeaways and nuggets. What about yourself?
Yeah, I think it was a fascinating one, the concept of what leadership is and isn't. We've spoken about this before on the podcast, but it never ceases to amaze me that when you speak to people out there, they still don't fully appreciate and understand what it actually really means, the whole servant leadership, what a privilege is actually to lead people. And also, just around stress management, we sort of gave a bit of a visual picture, I guess, of what, stress buckets could look like and how you could punch holes in them. So I think that was one that stuck out for me. But before we end the preamble, Val, what a year to kick off. Sorry, not a year. What an episode to kick off the year. I can't even talk anymore. You looking forward to this year?
Absolutely. It's been a few weeks, so this one might be a bit rusty because we have had holidays and we're back into it. But no, look, I'm really looking forward to 2023. It's going to be a huge year for the podcast. We've got some amazing guests lined up. We've got some amazing topics and debates coming up, and even some live ones with you, Dale, in the UK and potentially in Australia. It's just going to go from where we are today to the next level, and the more people involved, the better. So thanks for listening, everyone. Really appreciate all our listeners and sponsors and supporters. Really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Couldn't echo that any louder. And yeah, hopefully, you'll hear more of Val and I on the same episodes going forward. So folks, we'll leave it there. As we say, keep listening, keep liking, and keep paying it forward.
Hello, project people. Welcome back to a brand new 2023 project chatter. I can't believe it. OMG, it's 23. I have been away and I've enjoyed a bit of a break. But Dale, how are you, sir? Did you get away?
I'm good. I'm good. I've also been away a little bit, enjoyed a bit of a festive break. But yeah, Val, I can't believe it either. 6 seasons down, 150 odd episodes. Here we are, 2023. What a year 2022 was. But we won't spend too much time on that. How are you? It's good to have you back on the same episode.
I know. I felt like the last few episodes, it was just you. So it was the Dale Chatter podcast. But, I'm glad it was, because some of those episodes and guests were fantastic. And I had something to listen to over the holidays. So I do thank all of our end of year guests. But I do also want to introduce our first guest for the year, Susanne Madsen. We've got a great topic today. How are you? How was your year?
How was my year? Hello, by the way. How was my year, or how was
22.
the festive season? Because I got inspired by you sharing. No, it's great, because for 2 years straight, I wasn't able to go back to see my family in Denmark. So finally, I was able to jet off. Last year, I canceled the night before because of COVID. So that was non-happening Christmas. So it was very much happening this year. And I got to say hello to my grandmother, who was 101.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah, it is.
That is fantastic.
It is.
Congratulations, Grandma.
Yeah, she's still got her sense of humor when she can hear, so that's really good.
That is fantastic. I am so glad that people are able to fly back and forth and travel between states and borders, because it was difficult, and the Christmas before was a completely different story. So we can certainly say with open eyes and open hearts that 23 is looking pretty positive at the moment. Obviously, there are other tensions, but from a project perspective, lots of things to deal with. But this is a really useful and active topic to kind of tackle the start of the year, isn't it, Susanne? Because we can talk about this on any project really, or in life in general. But you've really kind of nailed this title for today's episode and today's session. But before we get into that, I mean, what's your story? Where did you come from? How did you get involved in this? What's your passion?
Wow, that's a big question. So I have a traditional background, fell into project management, as it were. But I guess what's interesting, perhaps for the listener, is that whereas I managed projects for, I don't even know if it's 18 years by now, but at that point in time, I got interested in coaching and in leadership. And today, obviously, actually it's coming up to 10 years now that I've worked independently as a coach and a trainer. And I was very lucky. I got invited to, so backtrack a bit. I was running this big program, the biggest in the bank. I was working in a bank in technology, worked for 2 years on this big program. And I was pretty close to facing burnout. And lots of things happened. I took a sabbatical. We can get into that. But more importantly, I attended a leadership program. And through that leadership program, I got introduced to coaching and to leadership. So in that 1 week, which was in 2008, is a long time ago now, I had some major aha moments. The first aha moment was, oh my God, project managers need leadership. And the second one was, coaching, what happened here? Because I was coached for the first time. And so I, after that program, I went home and I Googled coaching, and I ended up on a free weekend. And before the end of the weekend, I paid 5K. Actually, I thought I'd been brainwashed to do this whole coaching program. But all I knew was that it felt really good. And so that set me off on a whole other trajectory of coaching my fellow project managers. I was still working as a full-time project manager. And eventually, after some years, I thought, I've got to do this full time. So that's kind of a very condensed, quick summary that we can go in different directions with.
I love it. I love it. And the whole falling into project management sits really well with the themes of almost all the guests we've had on the show for the last 3 years. And, leadership is a hard skill to learn. I mean, I think it does need special attention and a certain call out, because of, as you said, you can manage projects. And to be honest, I think there's a level of scale to it. There's almost like a fixed ceiling to what we can do in terms of multitasking. And I've seen a lot of great project managers, as you said, get to that burnout stage, just trying to do the right thing. I don't think any project manager gets up in the morning and says, I can't wait to go out there and ruin this project. I think actually what happens is they get so overwhelmed with responsibility and the tactical work that they lose the ability to lead. And it's not until you do these courses, and I've done a few, and I think Dale's done a few of these coaching courses as well, and you do have those, oh, Jesus, that's right. You have a step back moment. My business partner's got a great analogy. It's like being on the dance floor and dancing, and then it's like going up to the balcony and looking at the people dancing, going from that strategic kind of looking from the balcony rather than being on the dance floor. And I think a lot of leaders are just too busy dancing. They're spinning plates. They're just trying to keep the lights on, so to speak. And that's really really hard for some people. And I've seen it take, if we go to the worst extremes, I know certain project managers who've taken their lives, not necessarily just because of this, but it's a compounding factor. Their personal lives weren't in order, their work lives weren't in order. It snowballs from there. Maybe their finances aren't in order because obviously COVID and other things have played that role. What's your suggestion in terms of just getting straight into it? Because I go straight to the deep end, and then Suzanne, Dale pulls us out of that, and then we go around and around again. But from a leadership perspective, do you say then, or do you suggest these coaching sessions, because obviously we've had some really good ones, are worth their money? Are they worth going to, even if there are only 2 days, 3 days, 5 days?
So first of all, I'm very sad that some project managers have taken their lives. It's actually, I fortunately, I don't know anyone who did that, but I have coached people who have been in not so great places. And coaching is not therapy. So I think that's important to say. But I have coached a few people who were also in therapy. And if they weren't in therapy, I would have suggested it. So people get value from 1 session, 2 sessions, 3 sessions. It's different for everybody. I've just been to Indonesia actually to run a program for a client of mine. And because I was out there anyway, you know, we had 32 people on the program. They all got 1 coaching session with me after the program. So 1 session isn't obviously the same as working with somebody for years. So you get the value from wherever you step onto that ladder kind of thing. So for 1 session, we can pick up on, if I run a program with them, we can pick up on what they took from it, what they're going to do with it, etc. Otherwise, I don't tend to do just 1 session with people because that's not really ideal. I tend to do minimum 4 or 6 sessions. And in 4 or 6 sessions, we can really get a lot done. We can't solve everything, but we can get some of the top priorities done. And interestingly enough, in my experience with coaching, oftentimes, because I coach mostly project managers, we start off with some of the, let's just call them hygiene things, right? The management side of things. They're overwhelmed or no, let me backtrack. Because overwhelm might not be a management thing, but we deal with, I don't know, if they have a question about planning or about risk management, some of those more easier things out of the way. That's not the issue. There's an answer for that. We get to the more personal things about why they're overwhelmed, or about why they can't say no, or about the conflict they keep having. They keep, you know, there's something going wrong in their relationships. And it gets, from my point of view, most interesting when we then draw parallels to their private lives. So I like to obviously coach a person holistically and get into the weeds of emotions, because we're steered by our emotions. We don't think we are. We don't like to think we are, but we are, because we're humans.
Yeah.
And in the leadership training I run, it's all about that. It's all about understanding why we act the way we do, whether you are trying to motivate a team member, whether you're trying to coordinate with a stakeholder or negotiate, and manage those emotions, because we don't want to be in a place where we react. We want to be in a place where we respond.
That is so well put. I've had very similar conversations around reactions and responses. And before we get into it, I usually do have, just for the listeners, you know, the definitions, because I think when we start talking about non-tangibles, like when we talk about leadership, people interpret it differently. And so I like to set a bit of a baseline for the listeners, so at least they know our context and the way we're talking. But what's your go-to definition for leadership? Because it can be confusing, the difference between management and leadership, because you hear things like good leaders and that person's a leader and a leadership team. What is your definition when you're talking to coachees?
I'm not a big person for definitions, but the way I describe it often is that management, and it's a bit of a black and white description I have, but I tend to say that management is more that rational, logical, you get things right. You do the, you know, there's a right or wrong answer. So risk management, planning, they're very interesting and important disciplines, but it's more in that kind of rational arena. And in a leadership, in a context of managing / leading people, a manager is more somebody who has authority over you, and it could be somebody who tells you what to do. It's more like that. The way I see it, not everybody would agree. The way I see it is more management is that command and control. Not necessarily, but let's just, you know, to make it easy to understand. I tell you what to do. I have the responsibility on my shoulders. Whereas leadership is very different. Leadership is more based on the person that you're leading. It's not just based on what I want you to do. I have a transformational relationship with you, rather than in management, more like a transactional. I tell you what to do and you do it. So leadership for me is much more people-centric. There's not one leadership approach that will work with everybody. That's why we talk about situational leadership. So the other thing I would say about leadership, obviously there's a lot we can say, is that we can either lead from the front or from behind. So leading from the front is when we are out there setting the vision and I'm the leader and I realize that my team needs my guidance. So I'm like, hey, this is going to be great. This is going to be a great project. And look what we're going to do. And we're going to add value. And, I can really paint that picture. And I'm like, hey, guys, come this way. And I'm inspiring. I stand up, I lead from the front. And oftentimes, it's equally important that we can lead from behind, because I think often we think of leadership as that person in front taking the lead. But leadership can equally be that person who is coaching from behind, who's saying, you can do it. What do you think? Which direction do you think we should go in? And asking all those beautiful coaching questions that really empower the team to go towards the direction that we have already set. So I didn't give you a definition, I think, but hopefully I described a few different perspectives.
No, that's good. I like that, leading from the front, leading from behind. Is there a certain preference in terms of personality type that would lead from the front? I mean, leading from the front is quite a, for me, it sounds like a very extroverted role. I don't know what Dale's preference is on this in terms of leading, but I actually enjoy the whole leading from behind, having individual one-on-ones, supporting career development, being part of the peripheral rather than being the showman at the front. Because again, there are some connotations to I think that sounds more like a CEO role, right? The CEO comes out, sets the vision, the mission, the purpose. Here's the objectives for the year, really defines the expectations for the company's perspective. And I guess people believe in that, and that's great to do, because obviously then people are aligned. They feel like there's confidence there in the company and their opportunities to work within that company, and obviously lead projects. Is there, back to my point, is there a question, is there any particular personality or even some data that would suggest that there are certain people who have a proclivity for certain types of leading using those kind of guidelines?
Yeah, I think you're spot on when you say that it's more extroverted to be leading from the front. However, both of those, leading from the front and leading from behind, they require somebody to be people oriented. So I do a lot of work in engineering organizations. And I love working with engineers. I just do. However, engineers are very much often on the management side. They lead through tasks, they lead through excellence, through execution. And they oftentimes roll up their sleeves and they show how things should be done. And they work very hard. But they are not the ones they're not so good at leading from the front. When they lead from the front, it's on the task. I show you how to do things. They're very good at that, but they're often, not always, but they're often less visionary. When they lead from the front, yeah, it's a little bit more prescriptive, more controlling perhaps. And they may not also be so great at leading from behind, because leading from behind also requires them to be very people-oriented, less task-oriented, and really help the person in front of them to excel in the way that it maximizes that person's skills and strengths. But otherwise, for sure, extroverted people, some people love to stand up and just chat, salespeople, right?
Well, I think you need that because of the, I mean, I've had some great, I'm sure we all have had some great CEOs and leaders in the business, and it's there because they love what they do. It comes across. So there's a level of authenticity and genuine kind of appeal. Listen, we're going to do this. We're going to break this project. We're going to deliver 50 billion. We're going to make people happy because we're connecting people together. We're closing the digital divide, whatever it might be. The slogans are helpful to kind of bring people together and have one vision. I remember I worked for a big program in Australia. It was NBN, and we had a new CEO come in. And, when a new leader comes in, there's always this, here we go again. There's going to be all these changes and uncertainty. And he goes, I've got a simple vision. We're gonna make 10 million happy homes. This is around connecting kind of telco infrastructure. And that was it. That was his whole pitch. I mean, obviously there was more to it, but that was everything that was stuck in everyone's mind. 10 million happy homes. What are we doing in 23? So I think there is a value in having a simple message, and that is a hard skill. And I think you're right with engineers that I've worked with. They are definitely, and this is a great thing about them. They show leadership through competence, and how they do that is through their technical acumen. And that is fantastic, because a lot of the time in other divisions of projects, they don't have that, and it's lacking. But most engineers I've met are also very passionate people as well, and they love it. So it's great. But Dale, what do you think?
I think all sorts of things. I think, to your question, I think I probably where I've landed with leadership is servant leadership. And what I mean by that is I think it's a privilege to be in a leadership role, because that means others have put their faith and trust in you to lead them and they follow you. And so it's very important that you realize that you serve those that follow you. And a lot of leaders, or people that call themselves leaders, I think forget about that sometimes. So that's where I am with it personally. But there are different styles, Susanne, as we can go into. I used to say when I was younger, we used to joke about this and say, if there's a saying, follow me, I'll be right behind you. But actually, as you grow older, you realize you can actually be a leader from behind. So I do like that as well. Just bring it back to definitions, though. We've mentioned a couple of times before in this podcast about react versus respond. What does that actually mean? Can you break that down for the listeners? What does react mean? What does respond mean? What's the difference, and why is one better than the other?
So I think it will be interesting for everybody right now listening to think of a situation where they got triggered. And I hope people understand the word triggered. So somebody said something, they gave you feedback, you got defensive, and either you wrote that angry email or we did something. For me, that's reacting. It basically means that I get triggered emotionally. So either could be angry, could be fearful. Oh my God, I'm going to lose my job. Oh, shoot, what am I going to do? I panic and I do something quickly. I send a few, I don't know what people do, but they do something, right? Maybe they go drink or something. I don't know. But it's the emotion that triggers a reaction. So you could also call it a knee-jerk reaction. We do something which isn't considered. It is a reaction because we feel frightened, we feel scared, we feel attacked. So we go into a fight, flight, or freeze mode. And we do it for survival reasons. You attack me, I attack you back because I wanna, I wanna fight. Or I run away, I think I'm gonna lose my job. I just quit now, right? I can't face it. And it's obviously a problem because, listen, if a tiger attacks you, you need to react. So that's why we have that instinctual response or reaction. But in modern day, we're not likely to die from being a project manager as long as we take our burnout signs seriously. So it's a problem to react too quickly because it's not thought through. The brain, very, very briefly, contains 3 major areas. So we have the frontal cortex with the frontal lobe, which is really where our reasoning sits. This is right at the front here. That's where we want to make, when we want to make good decisions, it should come from that very developed part of our brain. When we are triggered and we feel afraid of something, or we feel attacked by another person because of their feedback, for instance, we go into that middle part of the brain, which is where the amygdala sits. That's the one that says, hold on, what's happening? I'm under attack. It's the emotional brain. And then we have the last part of the brain, the brainstem, which is controlling our breathing and our heartbeat. So when I feel triggered because I feel you criticize me, I move the attention in my brain goes from that prefrontal cortex into my middle brain, and there's no one at home here anymore, so I can't think clearly. We know that, when we feel under attack, I can't think anymore, or gosh, we've got to have 150 emails that have just landed in my inbox, and my client is calling me. I can't think clearly because my heart is pounding, and I'm there's some kind of fear response there. So when we react, on the other hand, we can somehow calm ourselves down, and there are many ways we can do that. We can use the breath, we can count to 10, there's many techniques. We can calm ourselves down, we can move ourselves back into that frontal part of our brain where there's no panic. Okay, I have a problem. Maybe I have a problem, maybe I don't even have a problem when I think about it clearly. So I'm able to think more logically and rationally, and be a little bit more objective about what's happening. Was I really being attacked? Or if you did attack me, fine, but how should I respond to this? What's most conducive to what I want to achieve? Maybe I shouldn't just punch you. So that's kind of my half-long answer.
No, it makes absolute sense. And thank you for sharing that. I was just wondering, as you're talking, is there ever a time when it is better to react rather than respond?
If you're attacked literally physically, you know, if
Yep.
you walk down the street and a car is coming towards you, you don't think. And that's the beauty. We designed to not think. It goes straight into that part of the brain and you jump.
UFC would be a good one.
Otherwise, in a business context, I'm not so sure. Sorry, what did you say?
You're saying UFC because he's done some cage fighting.
Oh,
UFC, street fight. Whenever you're going to get punched in the face, it's good to react, I think.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. If there's physical harm, right?
I think some people are very quick-witted, and because it does happen in business context that people will come with some kind of remark which isn't perhaps so appropriate, and you can maybe very quickly avert it with a joke or whatever. So it's not necessarily bad, but
is a joke the best thing to do in that situation? What's the best thing to do if someone sort of says something and immediately you feel this anger or this, defense mode kick in? What's the best thing to do? Maybe to say nothing. Yeah, just to be silent. I think that depends on the situation, but silence is so powerful. If you come with, because oftentimes people want to provoke, right? They want that reaction from you. So if you say nothing, I'll tell you a story. I was presenting in Denmark, and I do very little business in Denmark for some reason, even if I'm Danish, but I was invited to present for a company. I did a whole day with them. And I came in the morning and I was preparing my flip charts, and this guy comes in and he turns out he's the big boss. And he starts chatting to me and he says, so why did we hire you for the day? I mean, what's so special about you? And he said it in kind of condescending way. And I don't know, I answered quite, whatever. But I felt a little bit of, he wanted to show me that he was a big boss. Okay. And then something else was wrong. I can't remember. And then I stood with my back to him and I was writing on the flip chart. And he said to me, it's way too small. I can't read a thing. And I ignored him. I stayed with my back to him and I continued writing. And he said something else. And I turned around and said, I heard you. And I just continued writing because I wasn't going to let him intimidate me and run the show. It was completely outrageous and inappropriate. And so I did respond to him, but I used the silence first, and silence speaks, because I'm not, if you're silent with somebody, it shows that you're not being provoked. Yeah. Yeah, and I love it as well, because we don't actually use silence enough, I think, especially in this day and age, because we're surrounded by, phones and TVs, electronics, and there's constantly noise, and we live in cities, and well, okay, maybe not all of us, some are fortunate enough to live in the countrysides, but we're used to noise, we're used to things happening. And then when we're so busy with our lives and there's this time to pause, not just with regards to sound, but just life in general, we forget how to pause and appreciate that pause as well. So not just in that situation, being able to pause, we haven't had the practice to be able to pause because we just don't know how to do it anymore. So maybe there's, as you say, and maybe this is where we'll get into emotional intelligence, stress management, maybe meditation, or mindfulness, as we call it. We've spoken a bit about that before as well. Val and I practice it, and we find it helps us personally on a personal level. But a lot of people that I speak to, even though it's been something that was around specifically during COVID and lockdown, a lot of people spoke about, taking a bit of time out and trying out mindfulness. A lot of people still haven't done it, and there are skeptics out there. But let's sort of head in towards the emotional intelligence side of things. What is that? Because we've heard it, for a couple of decades now, EQ, emotional intelligence. What does it actually really mean for those people that don't want to read, the plethora of books out there and all of the data? Can you simplify it? Yeah, and I like to say that it really has two parts to it. Well, it has four parts to it, but it has many parts, but at least two major parts. One part is noticing my own emotions and how I
use those emotions. So it's really the example I gave before where we get triggered. If I want to become better at responding, the emotional intelligence part is that I become self-aware enough that I can say, hold on, I feel really angry right now. It's okay. What am I going to do with that? Whereas if I'm not emotionally intelligent and I don't have the self-awareness, I just punched you or something like that. Hopefully not. But so that's one side, is my awareness of my own emotions and how I use them, self-manage them. The other side is what people often would say is empathy. So it is my ability to notice and perhaps even feel what is going on for somebody else. So what's going on for my stakeholder right now? Because they're behaving a bit weird, or they're doing and saying things, or they're attacking me. What's going on for them? Maybe they're under pressure. So it's my ability to notice their emotions and then to help manage that in relation to me.
Yeah, that's very wise words, because one of the things that springs to mind for me is I used to, specifically in my younger years, when people attack me, I'm like, oh, they're just being an idiot, or they're just like, they're this, they're that. You think all these awful thoughts of people, but something that I know Val does this as well is when people sort of are out of character or untoward towards you, one of the lines that I think we both use at times is, are you okay?
All right, very good.
And it softens them, because they're like, oh yeah, actually, you haven't responded in a way to go, that you haven't punched back, basically. You've actually gone, are you okay? And the response you get is like, actually, you know what? Yeah, I'm really struggling here, and all of a sudden the language and the mood changes. And I just wondered, do you have any other sort of tips and hints for how people can manage their own emotional intelligence, and also perhaps how, because empathy is an interesting one as well, right? I don't think we perhaps just naturally born knowing how to understand other people, because we just on this call, there's 3 different cultures, right? Different countries. We arguably speak 3 different languages. There's South African, Australian, and Danish. None of us speak English. So is there a way to sort of put yourself in other people's shoes? It's far more easier said than done, I think.
It is, and I agree with you that we're not necessarily born with it. Some people are. Some people have that natural ability. Some people are empaths, and if they're extreme empaths, they take on other people's pain, and they, so this balance and everything. I also have learned it a lot, because I was, worked in investment banking and technology, and it's all very fast moving, and it's all about results. And I really learned it mostly through my coaching journey. And first of all, I think people have got to have the willingness to want to connect, because if you are so busy and you believe that it's just about results and you want to lead through tasks, you don't even want to understand what's going on for somebody else. So step number 1 has to be acknowledging that there is a human being, and it's a win-win if we can use and build better relationships, build trusting relationships. It's a win-win situation for everybody and for the project. Okay, so you got to a stage where you want to connect, you want to understand, and what can you do? Well, it is asking questions. You had a question before, are you okay? So that's yes or no question. You could also ask a completely open question. So tell me about what's going on for you. And if it's a stakeholder we want to build a relationship with, what are your concerns about this project, or what are your hopes for this project, or I don't know, tell me about yourself if you don't know them. But really open questions. And if it's a team member, you want to understand, because they, I don't know, they may be behaving in a strange way as well. It's the same. What how even asking people, how are you feeling? Feeling?
Yeah.
Can we ask about that in the workplace? Yes, we can. Some people prefer that you ask, what are you thinking? But I think what are you feeling is a really good open question. And the person who's answering can decide where they want to go with that question.
Yeah, it's interesting that the value of Well, first, I think there's a few things I want to unbox with you, because I'd love to get your thoughts on it, Susanne, with regards to the way people think. And I think Dale was talking about language, but he means also the way we see the world. We don't perceive the world the same way, and therefore our understanding of the world is different. And this can lead to all sorts of things. And so I've always had to dabble a bit into psychology to be a good leader from my perspective, to understand how people think, because I think for me, and Dale would tell you, my empathy isn't that high. I'm usually more of a let's get it done person. But again, empaths, and I've read a lot about this, and a lot of them, it comes from childhood trauma. They're a lot more sensitive to the world around them when they become adults, and that can be difficult to navigate as well, especially when they're on your team. And they're more sensitive than others. And a lot of engineers and project managers were just like, we'll just get it done. Joe Bloggs did it, why can't you do it? And so you can't treat necessarily, you want an equal playing field, but you can't treat people all the same. And I think at a vast number, when you've got 1,000 people, that's how you think. But at an individual level, when we think about projects and we deliver them, it's usually on the back of a handful of heroic efforts, a handful of people who put in the hours, who do the extra effort, who really put themselves on the line, their health on the line, their family business, their extra time on the line to get the project done. I've never seen a project complete without these kind of heroic people. It's a thankless task, but people are so passionate about what they do. And one of the things I learned a long time ago, and I'm not promoting this, it was neuro-linguistic programming. I'm not presenting it as an art. It actually is probably more of an art, but there was something in that I wanted to raise with you to see if it was any validity in it, is the way of framing questions. And you mentioned open questions and there's closed questions. And there was this point of this course that I did about getting to a position of curiosity, trying to find out what people value is a really good way to start that kind of emotional intelligence journey. If you're meeting someone for the first time, I know Dale does this, sits down and develops what we call rapport and trust. Where do you think the journey begins in terms of building that? And is there any validity in some of this framing question NLP stuff?
Excuse me. Do you have an example of one of those questions?
A framing question? Yeah, sure. So what's the last thing to happen before you know you can get this done?
Oh, I see. That sounds, I need to think about that one. I need to think whether it's a leading question.
I think it is. It could be. It could very well be.
And I think it's important to say that if we are managing somebody, if you're a project manager and you have a team member, you can never be completely unbiased. So I can be unbiased. No, maybe I can't be unbiased, but I can be impartial when I coach somebody because I don't work for that company and I'm not their manager or leader. So I don't have an agenda when I coach somebody other than helping them move forward. But when we are a manager or a leader of somebody, maybe it's hard not to ask pointed questions because we do have an agenda. We want the project delivered. I just want to throw that out there. So when we want to build trust with somebody in the workplace, with a team member or a stakeholder or a client or a sponsor, there is a way to do it. And at the same time, we need to acknowledge that we do have an agenda. I just want to put that out there. Okay. So it's not wrong to have an agenda because we also have a goal. We have something we want to deliver. So I like to start conversation. I think I gave the examples before, just really basic. If you're building trust with a stakeholder, I think it's very important to let them speak and let them say what they want to say, because you don't know if they have a history with another project manager before you. You don't know if this project, if they tried to implement it 3 years ago. You don't know what their hopes and fears are. And they're the questions I would ask. I would just say, what are your thoughts around this project? If it's, at that kind of a broad level. I would also ask them, how would you like me to communicate with you? Because you want to show, if it's an important stakeholder, you want to show them that you value them, you value their time, and you're willing to maybe adapt your approach to them. And I think it's a fabulous question to ask a stakeholder. It really kind of, you bow a little bit to them. You can't do this with everybody, but you can do this with your most important stakeholders. And they will notice, they will, maybe not consciously, but unconsciously, they will notice that you are giving them choice.
Yeah.
And that will
Yeah.
build trust.
Absolutely. And I think the hows and the why is a really, really powerful one as well. I find that building trust also means that you understand why they come to the work in the first place. What makes them tick? Like, why do they get out of bed? Why are you here? In a nice sense, you want to frame that in. So what is it about this project that really gets you excited? You know, why project management for because again, I don't think project management is an easy job. I don't think being an engineer is an easy job, but people do it, and they do it for their entire lives, and they love it. Absolutely. When I meet a project manager who absolutely loves their job, they walk in, they're bouncing. It's hard. I'm sure they have times when it's not so fun, but they absolutely love it. So I think getting to the purpose of why they're there, and I think maybe some of the project managers I've met, maybe this is one of the issues they face is, as a leader, is maybe they don't understand the purpose of why they're getting out of bed, and that can help with their stress mode. What's your thoughts on that?
When it comes to a team member, which I think is more what you're talking about now, or if I were to build trust from a project manager's point of view towards a team member, building on what you're saying there, I would ask, what would you like more of and what would you like less of? Because they might not be able to answer the purpose question, because it's a big question. But I think almost everybody knows they would like more flexibility, they would like more experimentation, more new technology, or I don't know, some people want more spreadsheets. So, and people know what they want less of, want less red tape, or I don't know, fewer meetings. And so, whereas we can't give everybody what they want, knowing and understanding people's preferences and what they want more of and less of can really help us navigate. And perhaps we can change a few things around that will make a big difference to them.
I agree. I know Dale's got a few more, but one of the things around emotional intelligence that sticks me is the ability to practice. Because again, if it is a skill, and I think it is, because we talked about react and respond, and I think taking a break and breathing, and you had a really good story there to tell, and we've had a few. I actually used to get in trouble for being quiet in meetings. So for pausing too long, or for having too many, when you're having that internal dialogue, it almost feels like you're not engaged, which is not true. What's the best way to kind of pick up emotional intelligence training or development, or a book to read, or resources? Because a lot of the people that I've spoke to out there in the field that are struggling with some of this, they work with big government, and let's be honest, government is difficult from a lot of perspectives, but mostly because it's super slow, because of the size and bureaucracy, etc. And they do find themselves being in that reactive zone. How do they move the needle to the responsive? How do they become that controlled emotional intelligence leader?
Dale mentioned mindfulness previously, and I think that's a really good way to go about it. Because when we practice mindfulness, I think in no matter how we practice mindfulness, whether it's just short, several times a day, or whether it's a more formal practice, we practice observing what is going on, and we practice not getting involved with a thought or not getting involved with an emotion, and being a little bit more objective. And that really helps with that reactive, responsive mode. I don't think it helps necessarily with building rapport or with empathizing, but then if we engage in something like compassion training or compassion, that might help towards that. But I'm a coach, so I'm a bit biased. So I would say coaching is a really good way to pick up on it. And it's one of the main things I work with people on, because I'm not there to train them. Well, I run training too, but coaching is not as a skills transfer. I'm not there to help them plan or with those hard skills. It's really about it's often relationships, whether it's a relationship with myself or with other people. It's mostly about emotional intelligence, because it's about emotions.
And I think when it comes to decision making, usually the emotive is the last. If you look at the buying process or the buying sequence, when we buy something, we'll go through all the I guess the qualifications to make that buying purchase. But then at the end, it's like, how does it make me feel? And that usually becomes the final question you ask yourself or your partner or whoever else, and then you go, okay, I'm going to buy that thing. And I find with decision management, it's very, very similar. It's like a gut feel, particularly when you get good at your job. And a lot of people on these projects, they've done their 10, 15 years. They've got the battle scars. They've been around. So it's not necessarily that they don't have some emotional intelligence, but they have to be aware that when they get to a point of decision making, that emotion is going to come into play at some point. And I think you mentioned it a few times, that the self-awareness piece is really what you hone in. And apparently, and I'm saying apparently because mindfulness is something that I've struggled with, because I don't necessarily know what it means specifically, because it can mean a broad range of things. It could be meditation, it could be going for a walk, it could be getting out with nature, it could be I just listened to a podcast with David Goggins, and he has what he calls mental aid stations, which is basically when he goes to sleep or when he has a drink of water, anything when he's not doing something, for him is a mental aid station. And so for him, it's a very small window, right? He's happy with that, and he can continue on. But to flip it as well, I think there is a challenge with being overly emotionally, and don't get me wrong, overly emotionally sensitive or triggered perhaps for everything that happens. And I bring up two words, and I wonder what your thoughts are on this, Susanne: fortitude and resilience. How does that play into this mindfulness and emotional intelligence piece? Are they separate completely, or can you build resilience? And I think we're getting to that point with some type of emotional intelligence coaching.
Yeah, I always struggle with the word resilience. And maybe it's because I have the wrong end of the stick with this one, but I always feel that we want to build resilience so that we can push you more, so we can pile more stuff on you. So I think that's why I always feel that resilience is, I don't like how it's being used sometimes, or we just need to be more resilient. But when I think of a tree, I can relate to resilience better, because a tree is very resilient. Hopefully, it's got roots. It sways naturally. It's flexible. So when there is wind, it will move with the wind. It's flexible enough to adjust. And I think actually that is the gist of it, that when we are under pressure, and that pressure should not be constant or permanent, that we have enough, we are rooted enough, we are resilient and rested enough and robust enough also in our mindset, not be oversensitive, as you said, that we can absorb some of it. But again, I have a little bit of a funny taste in my mouth, because some people will use that to the extreme, and they'll just keep pushing, and then it becomes the person's issue that they're not resilient enough. I've just had a coaching session with somebody who is based in India, working for a large corporation, who is my client, and he was planning to take 2 weeks off over Christmas. He didn't manage one single day because his project was delayed. He didn't manage to take one single day off, not even the 25th, which was on a weekend this year. He wasn't able to take his family out even on the 25th. It's extreme. Some of these guys, they're working extreme hours, and they're so diligent. And so I just find some people say, well, he's extremely resilient, but it's not serving him. It's just too much. So that's why I have this bad taste when we say resilience. Actually, I want to come back on something you said before, that you're not sure about how to define mindfulness. I actually would like to give you a definition on this one, because there's a definition I think is brilliant from the Mindfulness Association in the UK, and they say mindfulness is noticing what is happening as it is happening. So you are aware of what is happening, could be a thought or an emotion or a sensation, in the moment as it is happening. It's actually a very tall order. For me, it's extremely challenging, because we get caught up with a thought and we're not necessarily noticing what is happening, or we get caught up with an emotion. I feel angry, or I'm afraid. And only 2 hours later do I notice, or, like, oh gosh, yeah, I got caught up in it again. So I think that's perhaps a definition you can use for something. But I think I went off track here a little bit. So
no, it's perfect. We love off tracks. We can go all terrain. We do camping. It's all good. I think you're right. But for me as well, it is maybe less about mindfulness, and for me, it's about mindful less. I feel like I need to dump truck some of my mental overload, where if camping's a good analogy, or at least a good story, because Dale does and we do go out in the bush and get away from the work experience, because I think if you're in that environment, it's very easy to stay in that environment. we all have been on calls where we're Zooming or Teams back to back all day, flat out. Then you've got the kids, then you've got dinner, then you've got more work to do to prepare for the next session. And you are full. Your brain is full of stuff. And then you've got birthdays, you've got dinners, you've got anniversaries, you've got holidays, you've got to plan all this stuff. So personal lives and work lives become merged, and then your wife or your husband's or partner's got the same thing happening, and it can get away from you. And I find that getting away, taking a break or being away or finding, I like to be isolated. That's not for everybody, but getting away from everybody completely, I can empty the mind. And I think that to me a little bit is more about this mindfulness piece. It for me is taking that bit of that journey alone. Or doing something really extreme like getting beat up, or doing an ice cold plunge, or breathing techniques like the Wim Hof method, which I find really useful. Taking some time, as you said, to recognize in the moment. I find that's really hard to do, and it takes practice and skill and effort. But at least you're giving, I guess, some of the listeners some resources to hold on to and have a think about it. I read something else, and this is my last one from before Dale hops in there, is I read something somewhere a long time ago that a lot of the time emotional intelligence is driven by internally self-esteem. And if we addressed some of the self-esteem issues, particularly, obviously this happens when people are younger, but certainly when they're adults, if they don't have a lot of confidence or self-belief or self management in that space, they can do more harm than good by trying to be, for example, resilient, as you said, or even try and take on empathy when they're taking on the emotions of others when they aren't. I'm lost. Can you hear me? Hello?
You're back now, Val.
Did you hear that last bit?
No, we lost the last 10, 20 seconds. I was wondering if it was me, but
no, it must have been me moving my hands around. I'm Italian, apparently. What I was saying was, I'll summarize it for you. But basically what I was saying was that there was a discussion or a report or an article I read that self-esteem was important to emotional intelligence, and that if we focused on self-esteem, we could actually affect some of the reactive, events that happen in projects and teams and leaders, etc. Is that true? Is there some link in terms of managing self-esteem before you go managing others' emotions?
Yeah, self-esteem is interesting, and I think most of the people I coach, even executives, they have. It's one of the biggest issues that I work with people on, and it goes very deep. And I guess just to follow your trail of thought there, that when we have low self-esteem, it has all kinds of implications. I could be compensating by trying to elevate myself and putting other people down, could be by criticizing. That's one way of doing it. Or another way is just that it could be that people withdraw. So because I don't feel I'm good enough, and I'm probably going to fail anyway. And that's more like I show outwardly that I don't believe in myself. I take on too much work. I can't say no because I constantly have to prove myself. Could also be that I'm very dependent on people praising me. So I overwork because I need you to praise me. So it can play out in many different ways, I think, but it is lack of confidence. And I know self-esteem is slightly different, but in that arena, it's one of the most one of the biggest characteristics that I see in people. And it's painful when people are clearly talented, and they can't see it very clearly, or they have so much to give. They're such a good colleague, for instance, and they constantly feel they're not good enough. They have to do things better. It's painful, and it's one of the things other people can see it. And I often work with my clients on it. I have them list things that they are, or their attributes. So it's an interesting exercise. I ask people to write down all of their strengths, and sometimes they can't identify very many. So I have them ask, what would other people say? What would your mum say?
Mm.
And they list all of these attributes, and then I have them take each of these strengths that they have and feel it, take it into the heart. It's not enough to think about it. You need to feel it, to take ownership for it in your body. And then to imagine that you're standing on this mountain, and below you, it's your mountain, it's all of your strengths and attributes. You're standing on it. And the thing is, you can't see it because you're standing on it. All you can see is other people's tall mountains. Oh my God, look at everything. Look at all their strengths. So it's a very it's a thing I work with people on a lot. Now, how does that affect emotional intelligence? I'm not so sure, because my ability to empathize with others, I think, maybe is not so affected by this. But you see, we all are programmed from that's why we see the world differently. And so if my program is, I don't value myself, I'm not good enough, or it will be the filter through which I see the entire world. And if you give me feedback, just to come back to that example, I could react in a number of ways based on this filter. And so it clouds everything. It clouds all of my interactions with myself and with others.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there is, it can be a dark storm if you aren't prepared for it. And that's why I think the leadership role is such an important one. And I think Dale said it before, this servant leadership role is that, it's a privilege to lead others, and it's quite a responsibility too, because what you say and how you say it perhaps can have massive effects and ripple throughout the organization. And so a toxic leader can definitely bring down a company. But then, conversely, a great leader can build up a company. And so they are really, really important roles. And these are great skills that we're talking about. So you had something else?
Yes, because it makes me think of those people, and I come across quite a few of them who say, you know what, it's not my role. It's not my role to motivate others or to figure out why, if they're having a bad day or whatever. They get paid to show up and to do a good job. That's my attitude. And that's fine. That's their programming. And some people we cannot change because they have a very strong task orientation, and maybe they're not in touch with their own emotions, and they can't see why they would engage with others at that level. But they have to realize, because there will never be a great leader. They might be a really good engineer or an individual contributor, but they will never be able to lead others, because it does require us to have that emotional attunement.
Yeah, it's fascinating listening to the two of you discuss this. It's all intertwined, isn't it? That's why you picked this topic, the trilogy: leadership, emotional intelligence, and stress management. And we flirted a little bit around stress management while discussing emotional intelligence as well as leadership. But we focus in on that, Susanne, about 5 or 6 years ago now, when it sort of first came out, mental health first aid training started, and I actually signed up to a course. And one of the things they teach you there, and obviously you're not there to sort of fix any sort of mental health issues. You're there as a first aider, right? That's the whole idea. It's like physical first aid, but for any mental health issues, challenges that one might be going through. And so one of the things they gave us was that everyone has a stress bucket. So, and they said that bucket is bigger or smaller for different people, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be bigger. You're not trying to make the bucket bigger. What you're trying to find are mechanisms that work for you to actually allow that bucket not to get full. So how do you punch holes in that bucket? How do you take things out of that bucket as it starts filling out, regardless of the size of it? And so that's kind of the way I've always thought since then about stress is my bucket full? Is the applying empathy, is the other person I'm dealing with, is their bucket perhaps full? Can I help them punch holes in? Can I help them help themselves punch some holes in their own bucket? Is that a fair way to sort of think about stress?
Yeah, I think it is. Because some people naturally are more, and maybe this is where the word resilient comes in again. Some people naturally have a bigger bucket and they're just more resilient. They can take more. They're thick-skinned, or I don't know, they're just not that bothered. But if you keep adding to that bucket, you just keep adding, which will happen if people don't say no. Even them, they're going to overflow, because they think maybe that they are invincible, and they're not.
Yeah.
And so so the overflow into the bucket is about workload. Often is about how much we add, how many assignments we take on. So we can look at that in managing stress. And then when you're talking about the hole, so it's really a press release, right? So we can punch a hole in that bucket, and we can let some of that steam out, in this case water or whatever is in that bucket. And that could be all these stress management techniques, or going for a walk, or mindfulness, or doing yoga, or I don't know, going on a holiday, whatever we do. I think it's very appropriate analogy.
And if I sort of build on that as well, what does burnout actually look like? So a lot of people say, I didn't realize I was burning out until I actually burnt out. What are some of the signs and
right,
sort of leading up to that people can look out for before they get to that stage?
You know, and I know people to whom this has happened, and I think the problem is that they have become desensitized to themselves. They do not notice. Or, of course, they notice, but they kind of excuse it. Oh, yeah, I have a headache, but it's normal. Or I have a constant cold, but everybody has a constant cold. Yeah, I feel stressed, but everybody feels stressed. I don't sleep very well, but I hear so many people having insomnia. So we kind of push it away. We don't really want to sit with it and look at it, because we don't want to say no. We don't want to give up our job or take a sabbatical or whatever it requires. It's the path of least resistance. So the body has to absorb all of these pressures. So there are many different warning signs. There are psychological signs, there are emotional signs, there are physical signs. Some people drink more, some people can't sleep, some people have aches and pains, some people get moody, they get angry, or they withdraw. There can be so many different symptoms. And one person stress symptoms will be different to another person's. And I think a good part of a leader is not just to manage my own stress levels, and also think about, I set an example for my team. So if I work from 7 to 9, which is unthinkable, isn't it? 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. But the person I spoke to yesterday, another person that I mentioned before, actually works those long hours. And I asked him, what example does this set for your team? And he was like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. Do you expect the same of your team? No. Well, your actions speak louder than words. So we have to, as leaders, also notice our team members' stress levels and try to tune into, maybe we can see that they're getting stressed, but they don't notice themselves.
Yeah. And you brought up something, because you mentioned it sort of in your journey, sabbatical. How does that fit into the whole stress management side of things? Because for a lot of people, I think it's a pipe dream. You know, they can't go on sabbatical because they can't afford it, or whatever. The main reason they can't afford it, they don't have, enough income. There's a, cost of living crisis, things like that. But then what is more important, again, your livelihood or your life? And if it gets to that stage, I wonder, what advice do you have for people to go, you know what, you should find a way to have a sabbatical? What does a sabbatical actually mean? What should people use a sabbatical for? Because some people say, I just want a career break and go on a holiday and explore, East Asia or something like that. But others actually use it for a mental break from all of the stress and, the rat race, the day to day. How do you approach sort of the sabbatical idea with people if they need that?
If people, so if we're in fight and flight, and if our bucket is overflowing, we're obviously in under too much pressure. And if we've been doing that for a long time, we need a longer break. So if the body is really run down, we've been doing this for years or decades, that's when we need a proper break. And a week will not cut it. 2 weeks will not cut it. It will take a while just to do nothing. So those people really need time just to do nothing. It could be months. And that's if they've really hit or very close to hitting burnout. For many other people, they might begin to notice different warning signs, or they're just not happy anymore. They're not turned on by the job anymore. So I think there can be many different reasons why somebody would want to take a little break. One could be simply just resting. One could be spending time with the family. I would ask people, what do you want more of? I think I mentioned this question, but what do you want more of? What gives you joy? What gives you energy? what do you, and they're like, I don't know anymore. Well, think back to when you were a teenager or in your early 20s. What did you naturally love doing? Like, oh yeah, I love to play music or play the guitar. It could be something like that. So we don't have to take a massive break to rejuvenate. But if we are truly burned out, we will need it.
Yeah.
Hopefully it
Yeah.
won't get to that stage.
Hopefully it doesn't, and hopefully, you know, people listening to this episode with you take some really good advice from what you're saying, because I think there's a lot packed into it. And you know, we're heading towards the end of the pod, and there's so much more we could go down. So we'd love to have you back to explore some more of these rabbit holes that we've gone down. But I just want to ask you one or two more before we sort of head off. Coaching, what makes a good coach? Because a lot of people sort of hear about coaching, understand kind of the basic notion of it. But what, you know, when people are looking for a coach, what should they be looking for in a good coach? Is it someone that, I guess, can relate to them, or is it something with a specific skill set, or a bit of both? What would your advice be?
You know, people use coaching again to mean different things. Some people are after a skills coach. I would maybe more say that's mentoring or training, but they want to be coached in how to plan a project, let's say. Yeah, I could do that, but I would say that's more like in the mentoring or training. So skills is not necessarily what makes a good coach, because a coach is not somebody normally who will tell you what to do. So a good coach is somebody, yes, number one, who you have good rapport with. Because if you don't feel you have good rapport, how are you supposed to open up? If you don't feel understood by this person, how are you supposed to be able to move forward and share your issues with them? A good coach. So actually, that's why many coaches offer a chemistry meeting or something, so you can kind of just see, do I feel understood? Do I feel that there's a good rapport between us? That's probably more important than many other things. But a good coach, otherwise, is somebody who can go, I think, to deeper levels with you. Somebody who can explore what's going on for you. Somebody who can explore the emotional side. So somebody who is just a newly qualified coach and they very much have been on a logical, rational management track, maybe they themselves need to expand into that emotional space, because if they can't feel their own emotions, how can they coach their coachees?
Yeah,
But it's a journey for all of us. I've developed
absolutely.
massively in this space in the last 12, 13 years.
Yeah, I think that growth mindset is something that people are becoming more aware of. And, you know, how do I get myself into that growth mindset? Because let's face it, we're constantly learning. The world is changing at a rapid pace and we need to keep up. And sometimes keeping up leads us to that burnout. So hopefully, folks, you've taken a lot of what Susanne shared with you today. But before we let you go, we want to give you a quick pop quiz, Susanne. It's 5 quick questions all about yourself, if you're ready.
All right, go for it.
So question 1, seafood, steak, or salad?
Do I just fire back, or do I give some perspective here?
You can fire back. You can give it a little bit of perspective. Totally up to you.
Some years ago, I would totally have said salad, but I'm no raw at the moment, strangely enough. So today I might say the steak.
Awesome. Question 2, are leaders born or made?
They are made. Some people are born with really strong leadership skills, but we can absolutely make leaders. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing the training I do.
Interesting. Question 3, if you could go back to one moment in your life, what would it be and why?
Gosh, that's a deep question. One moment in my life. I've enjoyed every moment. Oh, okay. So there's a moment I always think of, actually, and it's standing on a little island away from Bali, overlooking Bali. So it's a high point on an island called Lembergen. And I just remember standing there overlooking Bali and thinking, this is the most amazing moment ever. And I do love a perspective. I do love a good view.
Yeah, that's like Val's analogy of looking at the dance floor right from above. That's pretty cool. Moving on. Question 4. If you could choose to be stuck in a lift with 3 people, who would they be?
Oh, the Dalai Lama has to be definitely one of them. I think that he is incredibly inspiring. And maybe I would have to say Anthony Robbins, because for completely different reasons, But I just think that he's such a great example of somebody who has taught himself and built himself, and who has an incredible amount of knowledge and wisdom. And the third person, maybe just my grandmother.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Lovely. Good old Gran. Hello,
Yeah.
Gran, if you listen. Question. Question 5. If you could choose to have one superpower for a day, what would it be?
Oh gosh. Clairvoyance.
Wow.
Oh my
Wow.
God. Yeah. Anytime.
Wow, what a one to end on. Susanne Madsen, thank you so much. It's been amazing to, spend the best part of
I've
an
really
hour with
enjoyed
you.
it.
Yeah, and so did we. Before we let
Yeah.
you go, though, do you have any final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with?
Well, we didn't mention my book actually, and of course,
Yeah.
it references so much of what we've spoken about today, and it's now in a second edition. And if there's any Chinese people listening in or Polish people, it does exist in that language too, but otherwise just English. But it
Awesome.
is a book that covers both the leadership and the stress management and emotional
What's the
intelligence.
title, just for those listening on audio?
Oh yeah, The Power of Project Leadership.
The Power of Project Leadership. So we'll put the link in the show notes as well, folks. You can go out and check Susanne's book out there. But yeah, thank you, Susanne. It's been amazing. Val, any final thoughts from you?
No, thanks, Susanne. It was really great to kind of jostle some ideas and get some understanding. But I'd love to have you back. I think it's a conversation that we should have more of, not less of. And maybe we'll even get some questions from our listeners. So we've got some audience type questions that we can answer and some real life scenarios. But thanks for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Likewise, and I think your idea is great. I look forward to it.
Fantastic. And so do we. So folks, there you have it. That's all the time we have on this episode. But remember, before you go, please do help us pay it forward by sharing a link to this episode on your favorite social media. Once again, a massive thank you to our guest today, Susanne Madsen. And thank you all for listening. Till next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From me and Val, it's bye for now.